Welcome to the course Introduction to Urban Planning. In this session today, in our effort to contextualize our cities and to review their employment, we will walk through the planning narratives and interventions from the world and India from later part of 20th century till today, the early 21st century. Where we have such big giant cities, we are facing problems of environments, now the problem of health and COVID-19 pandemic, and very recent being cultural conflict and conflict of extreme ideologies. We are following Professor Luger's lectures and aligning with the Indian context. We ended our last session at the beginning of the neoliberalism, and today we shall cover the following. We will see how we moved from modernism to neoliberalism. We will look at new ways we started to address the cities to grow and sustain. We'll also look at the knowledge economy, financial cities, creative cities, green cities, transit-oriented development, use of technology such as robotics, artificial intelligence, internet in our cities, and we'll look at new urbanism. Further, we'll look at how we moved to sustainability agenda. In the end, we'll see COVID-19 and the new shifts towards health. The learning outcomes which we anticipate after completion of this session, that you'll be able to review the modernism and you will be able to differentiate between modernism and neoliberalism. Further, you will be able to identify the new ways in which we started to address the cities to grow and to sustain, such as knowledge economy, financial cities, creative cities, green cities, and you can also identify the concept of transit-oriented development, and then you will be also see and review the implication of use of technology, robotics, AI, internet in our cities. You'll be able to conceptually define or address the new urbanism. Further, you'll be able to talk about how we are looking at the sustainability issue, and then at this particular juncture, how we are looking at COVID-19 and the shifts towards the health-oriented cities. Industrial cities started to decline like we saw in the previous session, and we knew how to build city but had no idea on how to dismantle cities. There were opposing theories, but real transformation needed policy and structural fixes. So we saw that how in the previous lecture, how the neighborhood level interventions, voices were raising, which brought certain extent changes to certain extent, but could not be sufficient enough to bring the larger change. For that, policy and structural fixes were needed. We also saw that how cities were running out of money, cities were going bankrupt in the time. So we see here that in 1980, the period which we are talking about, here we see the beginning of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, which is a policy model of a social studies and economics, which means that there is transfer of control of economic factors from the public sector to the private sector. So we give that command to the private sector. This period is identified from 1980 to 1999 with the starting with the Cold War. We also see industrial cities declining and disinvestment taking place in the western cities. We see financial cities rising across the globe and giving new look to cities. While we see that industries grew in the global south, we were seeing that industries were growing in this and there was a power disbalance. At the same time, we got aware about the climate change and got conscious about our efforts with green and eco-cities approach. Simultaneously, we see that cities opened up for private investment, which we are seeing as a period of neoliberalism. Further, urban planning, which we had seen, started with architects, started with planners, and it was drawing oriented, physical planning oriented. It was transferring from physical planning to more towards the economic planning. Further, we see that many of the declined cities now later on started to regenerate in creative ways, very different ways what we had listed before. So we see that cities started to attract investments and attention for development through different ways. We see in this time that internet came into existence, and it drastically changed how these cities were working. We see now the network society, we see robotics, we see artificial intelligence, and this new invention and development could again transform. We are saying it could transform again in the lines what transformation we saw in the Industrial Revolution, or even bigger than that. And all these transformations, we are starting to see how our cities are getting into smart cities interventions and so on. Further, we see new economy shaping up. So we are seeing the kind of jobs which we did before. When we saw industrialization, we saw agriculture to industrial base economy. Now we are seeing a different kind of economy, a new economy which is shaping up in our cities. Further, we also see the conversation also forming around old phenomenon, but we also look at the new topics coming in, like gentrification. We also see new concepts in cities such as creative cities, green cities, and transit-oriented development in this period. In US, urban renewal at this particular time was recalled because the way you saw in the previous class, how they were not really effective and they were very much racialized, so they were rolled back. With the regeneration, we also see that investments were now done in pockets rather than doing it for the entire larger areas. Let us first try to understand neoliberalism. We try to understand the neoliberalism, which is a policy model of a social studies and economics that transfer control of economic factors to private sector from the public sector. Professor Luger explains the characteristic of neoliberalism. It says that the emphasis is more on the supply side, and the idea is that the trickle-down economy would happen. Further, we see that the competition in the cities is also market-led. Further, we see that government spends lesser and more of the investment comes from the private sector. That increases the role of the private sector. We also see that there is a flexibility in the labor market. Further, we see more integrated trade, less interference, regulation with the business deals. Further, we look at the mergers, acquisitions, and financial trading. We also see lower taxes, especially corporate taxes, idea that market will stimulate economic growth if left alone. Now we see that urban planning started with architects and then moved to planners, and now see multinational companies planning cities or running the cities as business. At this point, it is worth reviewing our economic and public infrastructure, how efficiently our cities are working, and how much money our cities have. It is seen that city authorities more and more have less money. When cities have less money to work, they rely on the new source of income, tax rebates, incentive to private investors. What does it really mean when cities have less money? So what the implications are. So then when cities have less money, they start giving tax break, incentives to the private investment. They start spending less on services infrastructure and rely more on the privatizing of these services. We see that they look at the emphasizing high tax yielding development such as real estate, tourism, related like hotels and other things, so which are high tax yielding developments. So they focus more on that, encouraging them. That's why we see that more and more cities are going towards tourism. Then we look at planning functions outsourced to private sectors. Then we see loss of redevelopment funding. We also see gentrification as one result of changing economy and changing policies. In India, we see a major step in the period. The major step was 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. In 1989, the central government introduced two Constitutional Amendment Act, which you have also seen previously. This brought in decentralization, and then the entities such as municipal bodies were identified and they were empowered for the third level of governance, so which was a major shift, which showed the shift from the rural to the urban understanding of ours. Further in the line with neoliberalism, in India we see foreign direct investments. FDI was introduced in 1991 under the Foreign Exchange Management Act. Further, we see that URDPFI guideline also provides section of consolidated FDI policy, which is directed or guides how urban and regional planning could take care of this FDI and could integrate it. Later in this period, we also see that URDPFI guidelines, then it was Urban Development Plan Formulation and Implementation, UDPFI guideline, which first came up, seeing all this urbanization trend, so which gave guidance to the planners and architects and the city managers how to go about designing things, planning for the cities. So the first guidelines was introduced in 1996. Later we see the revised version came in 2015, which was renamed as Urban and Regional Development Plan Formulation and Implementation Guidelines, which addressed to the need of regional development as well as inclusive planning, sustainable habitat, land use and transport integration at the planning stage. It also gave inputs on the service level benchmark, disaster management concept and governance reform was also given in this. Further in this time, we see in Indian scenario, urban infrastructure projects were more and more undertaken through public and private partnership, because we are looking at the neoliberalism period. We see how even public-private partnership was also increased and encouraged. So the public-private partnership, which is also said as PPP, is a commercial legal relationship defined by Government of India in 2011 as an arrangement between a government, statutory entity, government-owned entity on one side and a private sector entity on the other side, for the provision of public assets and or public services through the investments being made and or managed by the private sector entity. So this was undertaken, more of public-private partnership was encouraged in this period. So today there are hundreds of PPP projects in various stages of implementation throughout the country in different parts, in different cities. So infrastructure in India is poor when compared to similarly developed nations. The Government of India identified PPP as a way of developing countries' infrastructure. In 1990s, during India's first liberalization wave, there were various attempts to promote PPP. However, in some sectors such as water and sanitation, it failed. India was perceived as too risky and there was significant opposition to private sector involvement. It is only in the first half of the 2000 that the first PPP was signed and implemented. Looking at some of the case studies in an Indian context, we see that one of the example where we got good learning experience is Gurgaon. Gurgaon, which is one of Delhi's 4 major satellite cities and part of the National Capital Region. Its urban area can be broadly classified in 2 district sections, the Haryana Urban Development Authority area and the Old Town Municipal Area Limit. Urban development in Gurgaon is a joint operation of government and the private sector. Rapid and better organized urban growth happened due to the greater availability of the financial resources. Since we did it through public-private partnership, we had good access to resources and then the development took place faster. There was no hindrances in the development. In this, we saw that more than 45 private players were involved in Gurgaon property market, with the major players being DLF, Ansal and Unitech. Private capital had very little incentive to provide the public infrastructure that sustains cities. So the project came very fast, all the things were done very fast, there were no hindrances. However, the public infrastructure was not up to the mark as the government was expecting. Another example which we see based on the previous learning is the Delhi Metro. So Delhi Metro, a rail company, was set up on March 5, 1995, and here the public-private partnership was 50-50 partnership, between Government of India and Government of Delhi, GNCTD, to build and operate the system. The cost of the entire network is around, at that time, it was calculated to be 330 billion as of April 2001. And we see that it has been successfully implemented, and the process is still going on. Reviewing how did we really work through this period in Indian landscape, we see that we evolved in our process of decentralization and also opening up for the larger market and private players. We also had learning experiences on how to tackle urban issues with public-private partnership. Now, we will see how in the Western landscape, the declining cities were coming up with new strategies for urban growth. We start seeing new transformation in declined industrial space in Western cities, such as transformation of industrial loft space to retail space. So we see kind of a transition. The empty spaces were occupied by the new type of professionals and activities termed as revanchism or reconquest, which means recover the lost territory. So the new kind of professionals were taking over the empty spaces. So we saw that the post-industrial spaces, the blank spaces, were now transforming to nighttime economy. We see that cities were regaining their creative ways. One of the considered good case study of North Carolina is the Research Triangle, which had agriculture-based industries such as tobacco industries and textile industries, which declined. However, they had universities. But you would see that universities, the general problem is that when the graduates come, the city survives, but then all the graduates go out when they graduate and get their degree. So there was a brain drain. So considering that, they created a research triangle. Since they had 3 universities at their place, so they created a research triangle with low tax district with skilled workforce. So now you're seeing all the graduated students, so with the skilled workforce, and then they created incentive for business and companies. So they created a research triangle with low tax district with 6 skilled workforce and incentive for business and companies. Now considered, this case particularly is now considered as a success with high skilled workforce and number of companies flourishing in the region. We see a trend in such tech job cities in US and across the globe. However, the structural poverty continues. Despite that, we are seeing that these such cities are very successful. There is increase in income, there's increase in job, but there is still structural poverty which continues in such places. So it raises again questions about neoliberalism, that whether such kind of interventions are really successful or not, because such kind of interventions are leading to further economic divide, and the opportunities which are created by this, like you're seeing high skilled jobs, so the economic benefit is only being created and favored for the limited people. Comparing it with Asian and Indian context, we see the study, a comparison of various countries on knowledge-based economy, reveals that emerging economies in Asia and the Pacific perform far lower on the overall knowledge-based economy as compared to countries of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. In this section below, an assessment of the position of emerging economies of Asia and Pacific is provided. The review of Knowledge Economy Index score in India shows that there are still considerable barriers to doing business and high traffic. We are looking at the examples of the fastest growing cities here in India. Some very well known science and technology park in Indian context are Techno Park in Trivandrum, International Tech Park in Bangalore. We also see Tidal Park in Chennai, Info Park in Kochi, Hyderabad Information Technology Engineering Consultancy City, High Tech City in Hyderabad. Further, we also see biotechnology parks such as ICICI Knowledge Park, Shapurji Palanji Park, International Biotech Park, Golden Jubilee Biotech Park, and then Biotech Park, Lucknow. We also see that cities which have financial role are taking leading role. Like we said, now we are seeing a different kind of cities coming up. So we are seeing the financial cities coming up, and then they taking the leading role, and they are commanding the other cities. And these kind of cities have spread across the globe. So we see a city like New York, we see London, we see Tokyo. So in this image, we can see how in 2002, how the cities were had their financial flows from one city to the another. By 2012, we see that how those flows have increased in time. We started seeing and comparing cities with how connected cities are with the global economy. So in this image, we see how the cities are commanding cities. We see that the idea of global city became popular in the time. We see Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, London, Paris, Frankfurt, Milan, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo being topmost global cities. Also, planners realized that the cities were central to the process of globalization. However, these global cities also show considerable disparities. We also see Mumbai city playing a considerable stronger role as a command city, followed by New Delhi, Chennai, Bangalore, and Kolkata. Let us now review financial centers in India as per the KPMG recent report. We see the top 15 cities with the highest GDP. We see Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, and so on, which are top of the list. As per the KPMG report, based on the recent conducted research of 6 main locations, we see that they identified shared service centers in India such as Mumbai, Pune, Bangalore, NCR, Delhi, Chennai, Hyderabad, and their profiles, and they looked at the sustainability and the potential for future shared service center based on the range of factors. So their study revealed the kind of cities which can have such kind of shared centers. Further, we looked into Finance Talent Sustainability Index. Finance Sustainability Index represents the ability of a particular location to sustain a finance business in terms of generating relevant demand for finance jobs and providing adequate, relevant, skilled workforce, all of it at a reasonable cost to the employers. So we see which are our key cities here. Now let us see how, other than these command and global cities, how do smaller cities compete? So we are seeing these are the big cities which are competing in terms of being finance cities or the global cities, but how the smaller cities sustain. So we see here smaller cities organize themselves in form of urban agglomeration to compete for investment for tourists and residents and for business at a global level. For example, Greater Manchester, also termed as intra-urban competition by David Harvey. So with organizing themselves as urban agglomeration, they increase their size, they increase their capacity, and with this Greater Manchester is being able to compete at a global level. Cities also compete through economic clusters combined with agglomeration. So we also see the coming of cluster theory into picture by Porter in 1990. We see that it looks at the development of specialized economic of industrial clusters in a particular place that form a niche in the global economy. The example which we looked at was the research triangle. So on the similar line, how do we create the clusters? Looking at India, we see that cluster-based approach has been initiated. The government of India has announced the national manufacturing policy in year 2011 with the objective to enhance the share of manufacturing in GDP up to 25% within a decade, creating 100 million jobs. The National Manufacturing Policy outlines creation of clusters. The clusters play a critical role in technological propagation by facilitating technological learning and manufacturing through the presence of an entire ecosystem in a same geographical location. So we see the 12th five-year plan of Planning Commission also suggested a cluster approach for promotion of manufacturing industries. So we'll study about this more in our planning legislation segment. We'll look at what other policies came out related with national manufacturing policy, national investment and manufacturing zones, special economic zones, and we'll also look at the cluster development schemes, also schemes for MSME, micro, small and medium enterprises. Moving forward, another way in which cities compete with each other for investment include branding. So branding through mega events such as the event which you recently saw in Tokyo Olympics. Then you also saw, you have been seeing World Cup, tourism, culture, all these things. By holding mega events, the cities are looking towards branding themselves. We would particularly come across the name Richard Florida, who propagated or who conceptualized the creative city concept, and he identified the creative class for promoting the cities. In this concept, we see that art and culture and tourism have been central to city planning as ways to grow and improve cities since 1980s. We'll look more about this in our segment on culture and cities. Just to capture a few things, in India, heritage culture has been integral to our rural as well as urban life, and we see how we grew, evolved in the process of formally recognizing the urban culture through UNESCO and also through the intervention of Creative City Network. We also see that UNESCO inscribed Dholavira, an ancient Harappan city situated in present-day Gujarat, on the World Heritage List, making it the second Indian site to be accorded the tag this year. So we see Dholavira in Gujarat, we see Ramappa Temple in Telangana. We further see UNESCO Creative City Network was created in 2004 to foster international cooperation within and across cities worldwide that utilize culture and creativity as a strategic lever for sustainable urban development. So within this, we see that Indian National Commission for Cooperation with UNESCO has selected Jammu and Kashmir, summer capital Srinagar, among the two cities from India for UNESCO Creative Cities Network in 2021. Last year, UNESCO designated 66 new creative cities, of which southern Indian city Hyderabad was selected in the field of gastronomy, while Mumbai, capital city of Maharashtra, was designated in creative field of film. Moving forward, we also see interventions like Delhi Haat, which many other cities also took up for cultural revival and also to expedite tourism. Now we look at transit-oriented development as seen as another innovative approach to manage cities economically as well as sustainably. We see that the core idea of transit-oriented development came up with observing the urban sprawl, which is considered not good for public health or the environment or for the economy. It's expensive, it's polluting, it's unhealthy. So based on that, we started thinking or organizing ourselves around transit-oriented development. This concept came in 1970, and with this, we see how cities started to organize themselves around this concept. In India, when we look at this concept, we see many cities have adopted transit-oriented development. The growing urban sprawl in India is leading to increased use of private vehicles, congested road. You must be observing while traveling that how congested your roads are and how much long you have to travel. So, because of this, efforts have been taken to build smarter and more sustainable cities. The Government of India has been focusing on transit-oriented development to support urban transformation process. So, if you look at the concept of TOD, TOD integrates land use and transport planning and aims to develop planned sustainable urban growth centers having walkable and livable communities with high density mixed land use. Citizens have access to open green and public spaces, and at the same time transit facilities are efficiently utilized through this concept. In the image, we see how Bangalore has encouraged TOD in the city. Further, we see that now we have, again, like you had seen earlier, that we started making car-oriented cities. Now we have moves back when the sustainability issues have come up, the environmental issues have come up. We have started moving back to invest in the urban infrastructure, and we have started creating urban corridors. So you see the urban corridor example here from Tokyo to Osaka. You also see megacity region of Bangkok. If you look at Indian context and look at the industrial corridor, we have come up with a mega plan where we are connecting all the industrial corridor. You must have also seen this in our regional planning segment. We see that different sectors of economy are interdependent on each other. Industrial corridors, recognizing this interdependence, offer effective integration between industry and infrastructure, leading to overall economic and social development. Industrial corridor constitute world-class infrastructure. So we see all the infrastructure which has been planned out in the industrial corridor, worked out in India. We see high-speed transportation network. We see ports with state-of-art cargo handling equipment, modern airports. We see special economic regions or industrial areas. We see logistic park, knowledge park. We also see complementary infrastructure such as township, real estate, and then we also see urban infrastructure along with the enabling policy framework. So the examples of our industrial corridor include Delhi Mumbai Industrial Corridor, Chennai Bangalore Industrial Corridor. So right now we have 11 proposed in the country. The development of these 11 industrial corridor projects will be implemented through the National Industrial Corridor Development and Implementation Trust. These corridors are spread across India with strategic focus on inclusive development to provide a boost to industrialization and planned urbanization. We also see that smart cities are being developed along these corridors. Moving on, we see now the new urbanism is also coming into play in this period. The term new urbanism captures the movement that emphasized a return to denser, more traditional living and working environment with street connectivity, mixed use and town centers with historical architectural styles. So we see that how we were moving towards the transit oriented development, and then we are moving towards the new urbanism where we are getting more and more connected, plus or moving towards organizing ourselves in much more dense way. We also see the investment in the public transportation. Looking at the Indian context, public infrastructure has been identified as a key element. We see we have metro rail in the country. Rapid transit in India consists of metro, monorails and light rail system. The first rapid transit system in India was Kolkata Metro, which started operation in 1984. We see that metro rail system in India is popularized and developed. Particularly, we see the Delhi Metro, which was India's first modern metro, which began its operation in 2002. So, Rapid Metro Rail Gurgaon, which started operation in November 2013, is India's first privately owned and operated metro. So, we also see how private players are here in running the public infrastructure. We see that Delhi Metro recently started running without a driver on the 37-kilometer stretch Magenta line. With this leap of faith, Delhi Metro joined the selected few countries globally to have started operation for driverless metro. Our Prime Minister has inaugurated the driverless metro in Delhi on December 28, 2020. We also see investment in bullet trains in the country now. Further, we see investment in all the infrastructure through Amrit mission and also through the smart city missions. We see in this period that due to sustainability and the creative way to attract investments, we have also moved into initiatives like green and eco cities around the world. We see the example of city in China. We also see the example of city in Abu Dhabi, which are built around this concept. How much successful they are, that needs much more investigation, but then these concepts became popular. EcoCity, a city which is based on low or zero carbon principle, like we have seen in China and UAE. However, not all were feasible and realistic in their ideas. When we look at the Indian side, we see further like green cities coming up, Bangalore being one of the very prominent and known city which propagated the garden city concept and worked on this. However, there are different reviews related with this. Bangalore was also listed as top green city and environmentally responsible city owing to the spike in the demand for solar as well as garden products as per the research. Moving on, in this period there were so many ideas coming up. We see that another concept which came up was the livability paradigm with livability index. We see that Vancouver is considered as one of the most livable city at the global level. We also have comparison at the Indian level where we see that as per the ministry's research and study, we see that ease of living is best in Bangalore. Further, we see that in this intervention, we also promoted bike-led planning. For example, we see in Netherlands where cities were designed around how people could bike and move around, which was also environmental approach towards planning cities. We also see the challenge of how to develop the existing areas around the same concept, which further led to the concept of retrofit. Here we see the older areas where the development was in a different way, and now we are moving more towards the public infrastructure, public transportation. How do we reconnect to these areas? So for that, the new concept of retrofit came. And you have, if you may recollect, we also saw this in the smart intervention where the one component was on the retrofitting aspect. So now looking at the current time of when we are at the age of internet, we are at the age of data, we are at the time of artificial intelligence and robotics, we see cities moving towards adopting and consuming these data. So we have moved towards the smart urbanism. So the concept of smart urbanism comes here. We see how we have started looking at the future, and we are seeing that our cities need to be smart, they need to address the climate change, and how we need to work upon this. So we see that most of our technological solutions for smart cities involve smart energy, smart transportation, smart water. We see we are talking about smarter buildings, smart communication, smart network. So all these you have seen that how in India also we moved forward with the smart cities and how did we mobilized cities with the pilot projects, local area planning based pilot projects, and also certain intervention at the pan city level. We see here 5G smart city in Quayside, Toronto, so which is planned around all the new concepts of smart features. We see how people would move, how they would park, how they would use the passive housing, how they will have. Further, we see issue about women's safety in Indian landscape. Also, we are taking a lot of steps how to address about women's safety. And then we are also trying to encourage how women loitering is helpful to the urban environment. We are also conscious about the urban heat island, which we'll further see in the environmental segment. So at this particular juncture, we are looking at what are the sustainable approach for our cities, what are the less sustainable things and which are more sustainable. So more sustainable include the compact form of residential development, mixed use land use. We are also looking at the employment based primarily on education and skills rather than the manufacture, which are much more environmentally polluting industries. We are seeing how we can move more on foot and bicycle and then major public transport, and then we are also looking at the renewable energy. We are facing the pandemic, and all these theories which we had developed about the density, about the public transportation, about the public spaces, and the kind of land use we had been doing we have come to question here. We have started questioning, we have started rethinking about health infrastructure, how we can have a healthier cities, how we can have better health infrastructure, how we can have better public health and transportation, how we are going to reorganize ourselves when we need to work from home, we need to get our children educated from home, and how we are going to use the public spaces, and how our retail economy, we are also sitting at home and shopping from home, and how these informal jobs and what is going to happen with those kind of jobs. So all those things have to be rethought, reconsidered at this time, and at the same time we have to be thoughtful about the environment and about our health. So, summarizing, this is what we covered today. We saw the neoliberalism, we looked at how we have the various new ways, how we started looking at the cities, and we started trying all these concepts in our cities, and then we moved towards sustainability, and then finally we are at the point where we are looking at the health and health infrastructure and really thinking how we need to organize our own cities so that we are safe and we at the same time our approach are sustainable. Our coverage was limited with the scope to make you aware of the topic. There are enormous readings and movies available to explore. Few are suggested here. This is not an extensive list. You may feel free to suggest more from your experience. Please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about your concerns you have. Do share your opinion, experiences, and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring cities and urban planning. That's all for today. Thank you.